Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 381. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're honored to have with us the highly talented and internationally recognized journalist and author, David Preston. David.
Thank you for having me, Barney.
How's it going?
We've gotten to the point now in the summertime, where our temperature equals our humidity level here in Alabama, where it's 95, 96 degrees, and it's 95, 96% humidity. So
that's right. And the reason why, for our listeners and viewers, the reason why I'm laughing is because I never hit record, and David and I have been talking for 20 minutes, and I realized I never record the conversation. So we spent a good 10 minutes talking about the humidity in Alabama and how it's different between like the heat between southwestern United States and southeastern United States, and which one's better or worse. So that was a fun conversation. So we're gonna but you're here, David. You're not here. You're not a meteorologist. You're not here to talk about the weather. You're here to talk about your amazing book that just came out just a little bit ago, called Unknown Soldier, World War I, and the tagline. So you have a pretty good tagline about what this book is about.
this idea for this book really manifested itself when I was a child and visited the Tomb of the Unknown. And ever since then, I've always the question of what were the lives of the men buried there like if we knew who they were. Obviously, the whole point of the tomb is we don't know who they are. Obviously, what we discovered who one of them was, later on in the late '90s, and we can talk about that later if you'd like. And that was the Vietnam soldier that was buried there. But ever since I was a kid, I was like, what were their lives like? And so I started being a history nerd, growing up the son of a history major from the University of Southern Mississippi. I didn't go to Six Flags and Disney World for summer vacation. I went to Civil War battlefields for summer vacation. And we didn't drive those battlefields. We walked them. So, and we read every single placard and monument that was at those battlefields. So I kind of developed a love for history that way. And so I started doing some research into how the men that were buried there ended up there, and what cemeteries they came from, and what battles they may have fought in. And when I was doing that research, I came across the fact that a unit called the Alabama 167th National Guard served in the Rainbow Division in World War I. And the Rainbow Division fought in some of the battles that the bodies from those battles were buried in one of the cemeteries from which the bodies of that were selected for possible selection in the Tomb of the Unknown were buried from. So when I came across that Alabama 167th National Guard, I started doing research into that unit and coming across stories from their service in the war, and I was like, this has to be my World War I soldier, because I knew I wanted one of my soldiers to be from Alabama. I've lived in Alabama for 30 years. Didn't grow. Wasn't born here, didn't grow up here, but I've lived here for 30 years, the longest period of time I've ever lived anywhere in my life. So when I was researching these stories, I was like, I have to make this unit has to be the feature of my World War I book, because my favorite story from the book, and it's in the book, but it's a fictionalized account of a real life story that was relayed in research that I came across, and that was members of the Alabama 167th supposedly one evening snuck into no man's land and hung a banner from the fence line telling the Germans, "Give your heart to God, because your ass belongs to Alabama." And, I was like, that's just so quintessential Alabama that this has to be the story that I have to tell in this novel.
So can you discuss the process of blending real historical events with fictionalized accounts of soldiers' lives?
It's restrictive and it's freeing at the same time. It's restrictive in that you do have to follow the real life historical stories, but it's freeing at the same time in that you do have the ability to, it being a novel, you do have can take some artistic licensing, like the dialogue in the book is fictionalized, and and I don't know for a fact that that's what actually that was said during that time, but it could have been. And so it's restrictive in that you have to follow the timeline, which is one of the reasons why this is actually going to be the first in a series of 4 books, at least 4 books about the different wars that have somebody buried at the Tomb of the Unknown, which is why I'm deliberately waiting until the Korean War to feature my protagonist and main character as an African American one, because that's the first war I can really believably make my soldier an African American in an integrated unit. I deliberately chose not to make my main character in World War II African American because while there were African Americans that fought for America in World War II, those units are so well documented in history, like the Tuskegee Airmen and the African Americans that fought in fought in the Pearl Harbor attack. Those are so well documented that if you get something wrong in a historical fiction novel, people are going to notice it right off the bat, and they're going to be critical. So that's why I'm waiting until Korea to do my African American soldier. But because it's historical fiction and because it's you're following the real life stories of people that actually served, it's you've got a timeline to go by.
How did you develop the central character's journey from like seeking adventure to then like facing the brutal realities of war?
With the tagline, in the back of the book summary, it says that it's a coming of age story for the character that leaves the small southwest Alabama town for the big city, for adventure in the big city, and finds himself ending up in World War One. And that's really what the really the storyline I followed was exactly that. He left the small southwest town of Thomasville, Alabama, and for the big city of Mobile, Alabama, which was a fairly big city at the time. Uh, there's certainly bigger cities, but for someone in a town from Thomasville, Alabama, Mobile's a big city. And even to this day, even though it's 2 hours away from Mobile by vehicle, but wants to be a carpenter's apprentice, wants to end up being a carpenter, but ends up working at the state docks because he just can't find work as a carpenter, and he starts to get disillusioned a little bit with the work at the docks when the National Guard gets called up for service along the southwest border as a part of the American Punishment Force as a response to the Pancho Villa raids into New Mexico and Arizona before America enters World War One. And that's kind of his 9/11 moment for Pearl Harbor moment for the greatest generation. For my generation would be the 9/11 moment, that that shock of reading about the Pancho Villa raids and the anger that he felt, and in response to that drives him to go and join the 167th and eventually serve along the Mexican border as a part of the American Punishment Force. And then that service leads to the 167th becoming part of the Rainbow Division and going off to World War One.
So what challenge did you encounter while writing about, say, like psychological and the emotional toll of war on these soldiers?
Well, I didn't really touch on that subject too much.
Okay.
Obviously, they didn't call it PTSD back in World War One. It would have been shell shock. Uh,
Right.
and there was, I do certainly convey that war is a very taxing and physiologically and emotionally on soldiers. Uh, you know, that served in World War One, and it certainly was. I mean, we know a lot more about what it is now with calling it PTSD and how to treat it and how to help soldiers that have PTSD, handle it now. But you know, uh, you know, even back then in World War One, they were uh, they were rotating soldiers in and out of the front. As a matter of fact, I do illustrate this as a part of the book where uh, they would have three different levels of service when they were in war, where they would be right on the front lines. They would be, they'd be looking at the enemy
Mm.
for a couple of weeks. Then they would fall back to a reserve position where they weren't right on the front lines, but they could they were still providing support and backup to the people that were right on the front lines. And then that third wave was they would they would go back to the reserve back to camp, so to speak, where they would have a chance to wash their uniforms, catch up on letters from home, write letters to home, restock their ammunition, kind of rebuild their strength with good rations. At camp, seek medical attention, that's kind of stuff. So that's one way that the military really tried to manage that shell shock or that PTSD, so to speak. Is it would be like 2 weeks on the front, 2 weeks in reserve, and then 2 weeks, back at camp to kind of cycle through, so they weren't always on the front line and always continuously being taxed physically and emotionally.
And so so how did your visit to Arlington National Cemetery influence the tone and the direction of your novel? You mentioned how it was an inspiration, but how did it influence the tone that you took on your novel?
Well, it's a very reverent and very respectful place, obviously because of the nature of what it is. Uh, and so, even to this day, if you go to the Tomb of the Unknown and you cause a verbal disturbance, the tomb guards will admonish you very loudly and very publicly to be respectful of the nature of what that place is, and respectful of the people that are buried there. And and as a matter of fact, when I went there for the first time when I was a kid, we got there for the 5 o'clock changing of the guard, and we had the opportunity to actually see them lower the American flag outside the amphitheater that's at the tomb. And one of the things as a kid, being a teenager, you kind of you kind of looking for amusing things to amuse yourself, was when they were marching back from lowering the flag. I wanted to see if they were looking side to side as they were marching back to their barracks. And so I looked. I made it a point to look at their eyes behind their sunglasses, and those guys, they were looking straight ahead. If they were moving their eyes, they were not moving them to where you could see them, because those guys are very well trained, and they take that job very seriously. I actually, back in February, was in Washington for a political conference with Students for Liberty, and had the opportunity to go back to Arlington and back to the Tomb of the Unknown. Obviously, I had written this novel already, so that was one of the reasons why made it a point to go back to Arlington. And this time, I got the opportunity to actually witness a wreath laying ceremony at the tomb, which you don't always get to see. They do have frequent wreath laying ceremonies, but you don't. Not everybody gets to see. So that was a very reverent and very inspiring event as well.
Well, hey there. If you're enjoying our podcast, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep this show going. We love hearing from you, so any feedback is welcome. Thank you for being a part of our podcast family and for all your support. It truly means a lot to us. Right. And so for those to be aware of as well is that during World War One, it wasn't called World War One because that would insinuate that they were expecting a World War Two. Because before it was called the Great War, that was what World War One was originally called.
Exactly. So I do make that point throughout the book to not call it World War One because they wouldn't have called it World War One. They would have called it the Great War or the War in Europe, something to that effect. Because obviously, looking hindsight being 2020, we obviously know it was World War One, but they wouldn't have called it that because to them it was the Great War, just the European War.
Mm-hmm. And did you so so what impact do you hope that your novel will have on readers in understanding World War One and the soldiers that served during that time?
I really tried to convey with this novel that war is war wasn't this grandiose thing that Hollywood and history makes it out to be, where it's all of these grand battles with these grand armies facing off with each other, and it's these epic fights to the end, like we like to romanticize with the Civil War here in America, and like we like to romanticize with World War II with D-Day and Pearl Harbor and stuff like that. War really was, and World War One and really any war is soldiers and individual units fighting. Yeah, you did have those grand battles, like like Pearl Harbor and like the Civil War battles like Gettysburg and stuff. But a lot of times, war, even in those wars, was fighting for a farm or fighting for a street or fighting for a river, and just constantly pushing. It wasn't these, and it was a unit here and a unit there fighting over these small little things. So it's so I really try to convey that message with this uh, with this book, and really illustrate that a lot of times it's not these grandiose Gettysburg style battles where these grand
Mm-hmm.
armies are fighting facing off against each other. It's Alabama 167th facing off against a similar German company for a farm or for a street or for a river, and so that's what I really tried to convey. And then I also tried to convey that connection home to soldiers is really important to them as well, while they're fighting, because one of the constant threads throughout the novel is, and one of the ways that I always tie you know tie the experience in war back home, is James is my main character's letters back home to his younger sister.
Mm. Um, so, how did your background in political science and journalism help shape your perspective on writing historical fiction?
I'm a political science major from the University of South Alabama. Grew up a history nerd, so I grew up loving and studying history, and
Mm-hmm.
being a political science major, I like to say that political science is basically marketing for crooks. And and one of the things that politicians and people that are involved in politics have to do, and even in journalism, is you have to be able to convey the message that you're trying to convey in an entertaining way, almost like a story, almost like a novel. So,
Mm.
being a journalist and being involved in politics is good training for becoming an author, because you learn how to tell a story in a way that's entertaining, engaging, and captivating to keep people's attention. Because if you can't be entertaining and engaging, people are going to tune you out, or they're going to go somewhere else, because especially in today's media landscape, you've they have 100 different media sources they can go to, and if they're not going to be entertained, or they're not going to be interested in what you have to say, they're not, they're going to leave and may never come
Mm.
back.
Was there any particular scenes in the book that were emotionally challenging for you to write?
Yes, absolutely. Obviously, the end of the book, where where the where the main character and his unit is hit by a mortar attack. When you're writing this book, when you're writing a book like this, you kind of if you don't fall in love with the characters, you kind of certainly start to relate to them and you start to empathize with them, and and so when I got to the point where he became the unknown part, basically, it was
Mm.
I was sad to see him see him die. Obviously, as the author, I knew that he had to die because that's the point of the book. But and then writing the next chapter where his family is told that he's missing in action and presumed dead, that was an emotionally taxing uh, you know part of the book as well, because you start to relate to these characters and you start to like these characters and their personalities, and you don't want you're not human if you want them to go through the pain of losing a loved one. So you certainly empathize, and you're certainly you know you're sad that they have to go through that pain. So that really, when I got to that part of the book, it was really it not disappointing, but because that's the way the book has to end. But it's certainly sad.
How do you address the theme of anonymity and sacrifice, given that the novel's connection to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier?
There was that the reason he becomes unknown is because he and his unit come under a mortar attack during a particular battle that that causes ultimately causes him to be classified as missing in action, because that's the way if you if you are killed in action and they can't identify your body, they don't ever officially list you as killed in action. They list
Mm,
you missing in action, presumed dead.
right.
So, uh, uh, so that's how you get classified. So that's how, yeah. So, so that's how, obviously, when his family is notified, notified, they're not notified that he's dead. They're notified that he's missing in action, presumed dead.
So, what advice would you give writers that who aspire to tackle historical fiction, especially about events that happen in like wartime?
Best thing to do is start writing. Write it,
Mm,
write your book, because you can't finish a book if you don't ever start. And
right.
you can always go back and change things. You can always go back and add or take things away, like based off of in this process of writing this book. I certainly let it I have a cousin who served in the Alabama National Guard, and made a career out of serving in the National Guard. And so he gave me feedback. As a matter of fact, had to go and change the rank of my main character, because I make him a company commander, at some point throughout the novel. And I had him ranked as a lieutenant, I believe. And he's like, lieutenant or captain. I can't remember exactly which one right off the top of my head, but he was like, you can't, he can't be this rank and be a company commander. He has to be this rank or higher. So I had to go
Oh,
back and change that, because that's something that he noticed, with his military background. Uh, and then certainly, but like I said, you can always go add and take things away. Like with my next book that comes out here in a couple of weeks, 1828 is, uh, you know, uh, that's his alternate historical fiction that is going to become a critique of the 2024 election and the previous candidates that were in it, Trump and Biden. Because it's basically a alternate history using the 1828 electoral rematch of John Quincy Adams and Andrew
huh.
Jackson, and who were the previous candidates in 1824. There's accusations of stolen elections, fake news, political corruption in 1828, kind of like there is in 2024. But I was finishing up the book when the assassination attempt happened on President Trump, in Pennsylvania. And I was like, huh, yeah, I know that this book is going to become a, a, a critique of the 2024 election. There is a assassination attempt on Andrew Jackson that I can use as a model for an assassination attempt on Andrew Jackson. Hey, let
Right.
me go add an assassination attempt. So that's what I did.
Right.
And
Okay.
yeah, so that originally wasn't that part of 1828 really wasn't originally a part of the book, but I was able to work it in because of the facts surrounding the 2024 election, and there's actual an historical assassination attempt to work off of. So that I couldn't work in a chapter about one of the candidates getting switched out for vice president because that's just not believable. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
but yeah, but yeah, so but that's my advice. If you're going to write historical fiction, is obviously do your research. You don't have to be 100% 100% to you know to the T. Follow the letter of what actually happened. You can change things up a little bit, but you do have to follow the big events, because
Right.
if you don't follow the big events, it's not going to be believable, and people are going to put the book down and not go back and finish it.
So yeah, so you as you mentioned, you do have an upcoming project. It's called 1828, which is it's coming out September 3rd,
Correct.
2024.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
day after Labor Day.
So David, if people want to learn more about you and your work, where is the best place they could go to?
The best place they can go to is actually where you're at right now, my website, which is davidlpreston.com. And that's all one word. There's no spaces, no dashes. It's davidlpreston.com. It's got, it's got both of my books, 1828, which you're looking at now, and The Unknown Soldier, World War One. You can sign up for my newsletter, which will help you keep informed with other projects that I'm currently working on. When I release the World War II Unknown Soldier book, obviously that'll be I'll the big way that I'll communicate, hey, the upcoming release of this next book in this series is coming out. You can also
Mm.
buy copies of both books on my website. You can also go to Amazon and Books a Million and Barnes and Noble's websites and get them there certainly as well. Uh, but if you want a signed copy, you can certainly go to davidlpreston.com and order one there.
All right. Perfect. Excellent. Well, David, this has been a fantastic conversation. I'm glad we were able to connect.
Yes, absolutely. This has been fun. Being a political science major, I love to talk. If you can
Oh,
tell with the, I love to talk, and so I can jump on and talk about pretty much anything, especially something I'm working on. I'm actually currently in the process of writing a modern day organized mob murder book based out of New Orleans that I hope to have out by the end of the year. So
oh, fun. Excellent. Yeah, you're going to have to come back on when that book comes out then.
absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you for having me, Barney.
That's funny. I noticed that, didn't you?
Start over. Let's
that
start over.
was that was so yeah, so now we got some good b-roll footage. So yeah, so we just so for recording purposes, I'll put this in the b-roll at the end, the outtake at the end. I just wanted the audience to know David and I have been talking for a solid 20 minutes about this interview and about his book, and I never hit record, so now we get to try it all over again. That's a first for me, David. That's awesome. All right,
Hey,
here we go.
we all make
Yeah.
mistakes.
So here we go. All right, David. Let me do the intro again. See, it's like
All right, let's
so.
go.
Here we go. Here we go.